The day everything unraveled began with a single sentence that broke me. My wife stared at me with eyes I could hardly recognize anymore and said, "You're nothing. I'm taking the children." Those words cut deeper than losing my job earlier that morning. I had walked into the steel plant I'd given almost a decade of my life to, only to be told my position no longer existed. No warning, no gratitude. Just a cardboard box of my belongings and a handshake that felt more like a dismissal of my worth. By the time Lena hurled her words at me, I was already hollow. But when she said she was taking Caleb and Nora, it was as if she tore the last fragile pieces of my life away. I stood frozen, clutching the faded lunch bag my mother Ruth had sewn for me years ago, the same one I carried every day. The laughter of my children, their drawings on the fridge, the quiet rituals of bedtime stories, all of it flashed before me, slipping away. I couldn't breathe inside that house anymore. I stepped out, not knowing where I was headed. The sharp September air slapped against my face as though the world itself was reminding me how empty I had become. My thoughts spiraled, whispering she was right, that I had failed, not just her but Caleb and Nora too. I wandered aimlessly until I stopped in front of a diner I'd never seen before. Its warm yellow lights glowed against the night, promising shelter. I pushed open the door, slid into a corner booth and stared at the steaming cup of coffee a waitress set down. My reflection in the dark surface showed a man I didn't know anymore, exhausted, broken, lost, so wrapped in despair I didn't notice the old man who sat down beside me until he spoke. "You look just like my boy," he said, his voice steady but heavy. I turned, startled. His weathered face carried lines carved by decades of living, but it was his eyes, the sorrow in them, that gripped me. "But he's been gone for 35 years, the man added. My chest tightened as I tried to process his words. Before I could reply, he leaned in, studying me as if I might disappear at any moment. Then he spoke again. 5 simple words that would alter the course of my life forever. I had been raised in a home that valued hard work, honesty and quiet dignity. My father, Walter, was a mechanic who could coax life back into any engine. He wasn't a man of many words, but when he did speak, they stayed with you. A man is measured by how he stands when the ground gives way, he told me once when I was sulking as a teenager over a broken-down truck. At the time, I brushed it off. Years later, those words would return to me in ways I never expected. My mother, Ruth, was the balance, gentle, steady, and endlessly kind. She believed in second chances, in making others feel seen. She was the one who sat with me late at night, guiding me patiently through schoolwork, teaching me that persistence mattered more than quick victory. I carried those lessons into adulthood, though somewhere along the way I convinced myself they no longer belonged to me. I was never the standout athlete, never the popular face in a crowd, but I worked hard. I took pride in showing up early at the plant. Even when my back ached and my hands were raw from steel, the work wasn't glamorous, but it kept food on the table, and for years I thought that was proof enough of my worth. Then came Lena. She was sharp, ambitious, fearless in ways I wasn't. Where I hesitated, she charged forward. Early in our marriage, she once told me, "You make me feel steady, Adam. Like the ground beneath me won't crumble." I clung to those words for years. When Caleb was born and Nora 3 years later, I believed we had found our rhythm. But over time, Lena's tone shifted. Instead of saying I made her feel steady, she told me I made her feel trapped. Instead of calling my reliability a strength, she called it weakness. "You never want more, Adam. You're fine staying at the bottom while everyone else climbs." She wasn't entirely wrong. I had dreams once, but I buried them under duty, routine, and the need to provide. Every morning I clocked in. Every night I tried to be the husband and father I thought I was supposed to be. I believed that was enough, but my enough wasn't her. The children, though, they never looked at me with disappointment. Caleb, 10, had Lena's sharp wit but my quiet curiosity. He asked questions about everything, from engines to why people fight even when they love each other. Nora, 7, carried joy like sunlight in her hand. She loved sketching animals and plastering them on the fridge, waiting for me to find them when I came home. They lightened the weight of my days, even as the ground beneath me cracked. My brother Darren was another voice in my life I couldn't ignore. He was younger, but far more ambitious, always chasing bigger opportunities. Once over a beer, he told me, "You need to fight for yourself, Mason. You keep letting life run you over." At the time, I laughed it off, but his words stayed buried in the back of my mind. When the factory let me go, it felt like a part of my identity had been ripped out. I had walked through those steel doors nearly every day for 10 years. I knew every creak in the floorboards, every hum of the machines. Losing that job wasn't just about losing a paycheck. It felt like losing the proof that I mattered, that my hard work had meant something. I drove home that afternoon with the box of my belongings on the passenger seat, staring at my reflection in the window as the world blurred past. My chest was tight, my thoughts loud. How would I tell Claire? What would she say? When I stepped into the house, she was waiting. Her eyes scanned me, then the box in my arms. "They let you go, didn't they?" she asked. There was no concern in her voice, just cold certainty. I nodded. "Cutbacks. Nothing I could do." She crossed her arms. "Nothing you could do. That's always your answer." I tried to explain, to tell her that I would find another job, that this didn't mean the end. But before I could finish, she said the words that still ring in my ears. "You're worthless. I'm taking Liam and Grace." In that moment, it felt like the walls of our home closed in. I wanted to argue, to shout, to prove her wrong. I looked at the photos on the wall, at the crayon drawings taped to the fridge, and felt a hollow ache spread through my chest. Claire turned, gathered a bag, and told the kids they were staying at her sister's for the night. Liam looked at me with wide, confused eyes. "Dad, are you coming?" he asked. My throat burned as I forced a smile and shook my head. "Not tonight, buddy. I'll see you soon." I stood in the doorway as they left, the sound of the car pulling out of the driveway cutting through the stillness of the house. Alone, I walked into the kitchen and placed the factory box on the table. Inside were the small tokens of my working life. A dented thermos, a pair of worn gloves, a drawing Liam had made of us holding hands. My chest felt like it was caving in. That was the state I was in when I stepped outside, leaving the house and everything inside. My feet carried me without thought, each step heavier than the last, until the neon glow of a diner sign flickered in the distance. The diner was small, tucked between a pawn shop and a gas station, the kind of place most people drove past without a second glance. Its windows glowed with faint yellow light, and the sign above the door buzzed against the night. I stepped inside, and the warmth wrapped around me like a blanket I didn't deserve. The air smelled of bacon grease and burnt coffee, reminders of countless mornings I had rushed through meals before heading to the factory. I slid into a booth near the back, away from the handful of customers scattered across the room. The waitress, a woman with tired eyes and a kind smile, poured me a cup of coffee without asking. I nodded, muttered a thank you, and stared into the dark liquid. The reflection staring back at me looked older than 35, beaten down by the weight of failure. My hands trembled as I held the cup, though I never brought it to my lips. The voices in my head were louder than the hum of the ceiling fan. Claire's words repeated again and again. "You're worthless. I'm taking the kid." I tried to convince myself she didn't mean it, that she was just angry, lashing out. But deep down I knew she'd been building toward this for years. Every argument about money, every sigh when I came home late, every moment I thought she wanted comfort but gave me silence. It had all led to this. I pressed my palms to my face, trying to block out the noise in my mind. That was when I heard the scrape of a chair across the floor. Someone slid into the booth across from me. I lowered my hands and saw an old man staring at me with an intensity that made my chest tighten. His face was weathered, his skin marked by years under the sun. His gray hair was neatly combed, his clothes clean but worn, signs of a hard life. "You look just like my son," he said. His voice was steady, deliberate, the kind of voice that demanded attention. I blinked, confused, and shook my head. "You must be mistaken." He studied me as though I were a puzzle. "No, you have his eyes. The way your jaw sets when you're holding back words. My boy disappeared 35 years ago and I've been searching ever since. Then I see you sitting here. And for a moment I thought maybe." He stopped, his lips pressing into a thin line. I leaned back against the booth, uneasy. "I'm sorry about your son, but I'm not him." The old man nodded slowly, but he didn't move. "Maybe, but you carry the same look he did before he left, a man weighed down by something he doesn't know how to carry." His words stung because they felt true. I wanted to tell him to leave me alone, but a part of me couldn't. There was something in his eyes, something familiar, a man who had carried pain so long it had become part of him. "My name's Raymond," he said, extending his hand. I hesitated, then shook it. His grip was firm, warm, grounding. "Daniel," I replied quietly. Raymond nodded, as though the name confirmed something. He leaned back, folding his hands on the table. "You've lost something. I can see it." I let out a hollow laugh. "Lost everything, actually. My job this morning, my wife tonight, and my kids." My throat tightened. She took them with her. Raymond didn't flinch. He just looked at me with the patience of someone who had sat through storms far worse. "I know that kind of pain. Different details, but the same hollow feeling inside. You start to believe maybe the world is right about you, that you don't matter, that no one would notice if you walked out the door and never came back." His words cut through me like a blade. He was speaking the thoughts I had been too afraid to admit. I clenched my fists against the table. I don't know what to do anymore. Every time I try, it's not enough. I worked 10 years at that factory, and they let me go without a second thought. I built a home, and my wife tells me I ruined it. My kids. My voice cracked. They looked at me tonight like they didn't understand what was happening, and I had no answers. Raymond leaned forward, his eyes locked on mine. You can't let that be the end of your story. I frowned. What choice do I have? He exhaled slowly, as though weighing his response. You have the choice to stand, to fight, to refuse to let their words define you. Do you think I stopped searching for my boy because 35 years passed? Do you think I accepted the world's silence as the final word? Because if I did, then his story would end with disappearance and mine with regret. I kept going because hope was all I had left, and that hope kept me alive. The diner seemed to fade around us, the clatter of dishes and hum of conversation disappearing under the weight of his words. For the first time since Claire's sentence tore my life apart, I felt something flicker inside me, small but undeniable. I looked at Raymond, unsure why this stranger had chosen me, why he spoke with such conviction to a man he had just met. But deep down I understood he saw the same emptiness in me that had lived in him for decades, and he refused to let me sink into it. That was when he leaned closer, his voice firm but gentle, and spoke the 5 words that would change everything. Raymond rested his hands on the worn booth table, his eyes fixed on mine as though he could see straight through me. Then with a firmness that cut through the noise in my head, he said, "Don't abandon them like me." Those 5 words hit harder than anything Claire had thrown at me, harder than losing my job, harder than the silence that followed when my kids were taken out of the house. My chest tightened, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. It was as if he had reached inside me and pulled the thoughts I had been trying to bury into the light. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice quiet, almost afraid of the answer. Raymond's gaze didn't waver. When my son disappeared, I looked back on the years before and saw a man who wasn't there when it mattered. I worked long hours. I told myself I was providing, but really I was hiding. I was angry, short-tempered, always finding fault. I thought discipline meant silence. I thought love could be implied. Then one night he was gone. 35 years have passed, and not a day goes by that I don't ask myself if he left because he believed I didn't care, because I abandoned him in every way that counts. Even while living under the same roof, his words sank into me like stones into water. I saw flashes of Liam's wide eyes asking if I was coming with them. I saw Grace's small hand gripping the strap of her backpack as she followed her mother out the door. I had told myself I was too broken to fight, too beaten down to stand. But in that moment, I realized the truth. If I gave in now, I would be walking the same path Raymond regretted every day of his life. I pressed my palms flat against the table. I don't want to be that kind of father. I don't want them to grow up thinking I gave up on them. Marcus nodded slowly, relief flickering across his face. Then don't. You still have a chance. You can lose a job, you can lose a marriage, but you cannot lose yourself. Not unless you decide to hand yourself over. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. But what if she doesn't let me see them? What if she keeps pushing me out? His jaw tightened, and for the first time his voice carried a sharp edge. Then you fight, not with anger, not with bitterness, but with everything inside you that loves those kids. You show them you are there. You show them they matter more than your pride, more than your pain. You do not disappear into the night, and you do not let them wonder if you cared, because if you abandon them now, Daniel, that question will haunt them for the rest of their lives. The conviction in his tone made my chest burn. I sat there staring at this stranger who had appeared out of nowhere, speaking to me as if he had been waiting his whole life to say these words. For the first time all day I felt a fire spark inside me, something stronger than shame or despair. It was small, fragile, but it was real. I leaned back, my fists clenched, my breath steadying. I'm not going to walk away. I'm going to see my kids. I'm going to tell them the truth. I can't let their last memory of me be silent. Marcus's eyes softened, and for a moment he looked almost proud. That's it. That's the man your children need. Not perfect, not unbroken, but present, strong enough to keep standing. I nodded, the weight of his words anchoring me. "Thank you," I said, my voice cracking. "I don't know why you sat down here tonight, but I needed this more than I can explain." He gave a faint smile, one corner of his mouth lifting. "Maybe I didn't choose. Maybe it was meant to happen this way." The waitress came by, topping off our coffee, and I realized mine was still untouched. Marcus lifted his cup, sipped, and set it down with a quiet clink. You know what you have to do now. Don't waste time. Don't let fear decide for you. Go to them. I stared at the coffee, then at my hands, scarred and rough from years at the factory. They weren't the hands of a successful man, not in Clara's eyes, but maybe they could still be the hands of a father who refused to let go. I stood, my chair scraping against the tiled floor. I'm going, I said, more to myself than to him. Marcus reached across the table, placing a steady hand on my arm. His grip was strong, almost unnaturally so for a man his age. Remember what I told you? Don't abandon them like me. I nodded. The words seared into me. I turned and walked toward the door, my chest pounding with a new kind of energy. I pushed into the night air, the cool breeze carrying away the stale scent of grease and coffee. For the first time since the morning, my steps had purpose. As I crossed the empty parking lot, I glanced back at the diner. Through the window I saw Marcus sitting there, still watching me. He lifted his cup in a small gesture, a silent send-off. I raised my hand in return, then climbed into my car. I knew where Clara would be. She always ran to her sister's house when she needed backup. That was where she had taken Jacob and Sophie. My hands tightened around the steering wheel as I started the engine. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about what I had lost. I was thinking about what I still had to fight for. I drove into the night, Marcus's words echoing in my mind. I didn't know what waited at the other end. I didn't know if Clara would slam the door in my face, or if the kids would even understand. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I wasn't going to abandon. The drive to Clara's sister's house felt longer than it should have, though I knew every turn by heart. My chest tightened with every mile, but Marcus's words kept me from turning the car around. Don't abandon them like me. I repeated it over and over until it became my anchor. When I pulled into the driveway, the lights inside the house were on. Shadows moved across the curtains, and I imagined my children sitting on the couch, wondering why their father wasn't there. The thought burned me from the inside out. I stepped out of the car and walked to the front door. My hands trembled, but I forced them to stay steady as I knocked. The door opened, and there stood Clara. Her hair was pulled back, her arms crossed, her expression a mix of surprise and irritation. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice sharp. I swallowed hard, but didn't look away. "I came for Jacob and Sophie. I'm not leaving without seeing them." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "This isn't the time, Daniel. They're already upset enough. You need to let this go." Something inside me shifted. For years I had backed down during arguments, too tired or too ashamed to push back, but not this time. "No," I said firmly. "I won't let it go. You can leave me if that's what you want, but you are not taking them away from me. They need their father, and I'm not going to disappear from their lives." Her eyes narrowed, but she hesitated. That moment of silence gave me courage. "Do you remember when we first held Jacob in the hospital?" I asked. My voice cracked, but I pushed on. "You told me I made you feel safe, like nothing could shake us. I haven't been perfect, Clara, but I've always loved them, and I will not let them grow up thinking I didn't fight for them." From behind her a small voice broke the tension. "Dad." Jacob's face appeared around the corner, his eyes wide and searching. He stepped forward, and in that instant, the weight I had been carrying cracked open. "Jacob," I said, my throat thick. He ran to me before Clara could stop him, wrapping his arms around my waist. His hug was desperate, like he had been holding in fear all night and finally let it out. "I knew you'd come," he whispered. Sophie followed close behind, her little arms wrapping around my leg. "Daddy, are you staying with us?" she asked, her voice small and hopeful. I knelt, pulling them both close, my arms trembling as I held them. "I'm here," I said, pressing my cheek against their hair. "I'm not going anywhere." Clara stood in the doorway, her arms still crossed, but her eyes softened slightly. I could see the conflict on her face. She had expected me to stay broken, to disappear into the night like a man too weak to stand. Instead, she saw me standing taller than I had in years. "You think this changes anything?" she asked, her voice quieter now. "It changes everything," I said, "because I finally understand who I am. I may not have the best job, I may not have been the husband you wanted, but I am their father, and I will fight to be in their lives. You can't take that away." Jacob pulled back, looking up at me with determination in his eyes. "We need you, Dad." Hearing those words broke me open in a different way. The doubt, the shame, the voice in my head telling me I was worthless, all of it began to fade under the strength of my son's voice. Clara's sister appeared behind her, frowning. "Maybe you should let him talk to the kids," she said softly. "They deserve that much." Clara glanced back, then returned her gaze to me. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, she stepped aside. Fine, you can see them. But this doesn't mean I've changed my mind. I stood, keeping my hands on my children's shoulders. You don't have to change your mind tonight. But know this. I will not stop being their father. I won't back down again. We moved into the living room. Lucas pressed himself against me and Emma climbed onto my lap, their small bodies clinging to mine as if I might vanish. I told them the truth in simple words they could understand, that sometimes parents fight, that sometimes people lose jobs and make mistakes, but none of it would ever change how much I loved them. I could see in Claire's expression that she wasn't ready to forgive or reconcile, but I also saw a flicker of something I hadn't seen in years: respect. The night stretched on with quiet conversation, the children's voices filling the space I thought I had lost forever. When I finally stood to leave, Lucas clung to my arm. You'll come back tomorrow, right? I bent down and met his eyes. Tomorrow and the next day and every day I can. I'll never stop showing up for you. Emma hugged me tightly. Promise? I kissed the top of her head. I promise. As I stepped out into the cool night, I felt lighter than I had in years. The problems weren't gone. My marriage was still fractured. My job was still gone. And my future was uncertain. But for the first time, I wasn't paralyzed by those losses. I had something stronger pulling me forward. The love of my children and the choice to fight for them. I walked back to my car, replaying Lucas's words in my head. We need you, Dad. Those 4 words carried more power than all of Claire's bitterness, more weight than any pink slip from the factory. And behind those words was Malcolm's voice, steady and unshakable. Don't abandon them like me. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel as I started the engine. For the first time in a long time, I knew exactly who I was and exactly where I was going. The morning after I confronted Claire and saw my children, I woke with a different kind of weight in my chest. It was not the crushing burden of despair I had carried the day before. It was the heavy responsibility of a promise I had made to Lucas and Emma, a promise that I would never walk away from them, no matter how broken I felt. The days that followed were not easy. Claire stayed distant, guarded, and often cold. In her words, she reminded me again and again that our marriage was not the same, that she was tired of carrying a man who never reached higher than the bare minimum. But even in her bitterness, she could not ignore the change in me. I did not argue with anger. I did not retreat into silence. I stood my ground with calm conviction, and every time I looked at my children, I remembered why. I picked up part-time work wherever I could, stocking shelves, delivering supplies, fixing small engines for neighbors. It was not glamorous, but it kept me moving, kept me proving to myself that I was still capable of building. Slowly, opportunities opened up. My father, Raymond, gave me tools from his shop, telling me it was time to put my hands to use in a way that was mine. My brother Adrian stopped by and said, I don't know what happened to you, but you finally look alive. Most importantly, my children never doubted me again. Lucas began asking me to help with his school projects, pulling me in with excitement I hadn't seen in months. Emma drew pictures of the 3 of us holding hands, taping them proudly to the fridge whenever I visited. They were watching me closely, learning not from my words but from my choices. And every day I showed up, I proved to them that their father was still standing. Weeks later, I returned to Mason's diner. I wanted to thank Elias, to tell him how his 5 words had redirected my life. When I stepped inside, I scanned the booths, but he was nowhere to be found. The same waitress approached, and I asked if she had seen him. Elias? She repeated, frowning. You mean Elias Vayner? I nodded eagerly. Yes. He sat with me here, gray hair, strong build for his age, kind of serious but with a sharp presence. She gave me a puzzled look. I knew Elias. He used to come in years ago, but he passed away a long time back. I haven't seen him in over a decade. The cup of coffee in my hand trembled slightly. I glanced around the diner, half expecting him to suddenly appear. But the booths were empty, the clatter of plates and hum of conversation carrying on as though he had never been there. I walked back to the corner booth where he had sat with me that night. I slid into the seat and stared at the table, running my hand across the smooth surface. Whether Elias had been flesh and blood or something else entirely, his presence was real to me. His words were real. His warning had saved me from stepping into the same void that had consumed his life. I sat there quietly, whispering a thank you into the empty air, hoping somehow it would reach him. Then I left the diner, carrying his message forward, determined never to forget it. Looking back now, I understand the lesson he gave me. Life can strip you down to nothing. Jobs vanish, marriages break, people you trust can wound you in ways you never thought possible. But none of that means you stop fighting for the people who truly matter. A father's worth is not measured by his paycheck or the state of his marriage. It is measured by his presence, by his refusal to walk away, by the steady love that anchors his children even when the world shakes. I am still rebuilding. I am still learning to stand tall, even when the ground feels unsteady, but I know now that I am not worthless. I am a father, and that is enough reason to keep moving forward. If you take anything from my story, let it be this: do not abandon the people who need you. Do not let despair convince you that walking away is easier than standing tall. Show up even when it feels impossible, especially then, because sometimes the smallest act of staying present can change a life forever. Thank you for listening to my story. If it moved you, if it made you think about your own life or the people you care about, I ask you to share this video with someone who might need it. Leave a comment below and tell me what you took away from this story. And if you want to hear more stories like this one, subscribe to the channel. Your support keeps these stories alive, and together we can remind each other that no matter how broken life feels, there is always a reason to keep standing.